Hi, this is Ben, aka Encanti from DataMind Audio, and we are excited to announce the release of the Concatenator Mini, which is simpler and more affordable. It's a great entry-level plugin if you're just getting into audio mosaicing via concatenative synthesis, and it's a really quick and easy solution if you want to incorporate a lot of samples and interesting audio mosaics into your work, whether you're doing sound design for TV, film, and game, or if you're just trying to make interesting music that doesn't sound like you're using your typical keyboards and samplers out there. So Concatenator works like an audio effect. You load it onto a track that's already producing audio, but I want you to think of it as an audio effect that's played like an instrument. When you open it up, of course, it is very small, very mini, and by default, you'll have this default preset that has a couple of samples that have been selected and loaded into this from our sample collection. When you open up the preset view, you'll see that we've labeled what the ideal input might be for each preset. So this says drums and percussive right here. That means I want to run drums through these presets, and it'll tell you a vague estimation of what the output is going to be. So for instance, Angel Trance 2, you will send melody into that, and you'll get vocals and melody and kind of synth sounds out on the other side. I have this loaded onto an audio track that has Serum on it. Nothing special about this preset right here. And we have a couple other effects, but I'm going to turn those on later. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do something in D minor, and I'll explain why I'm choosing D minor a little bit later. Let's just do something really simple. Now let's go ahead and mix in the concatenator, and let's try to explain what's going on. So what's happening here is the Concatenator Mini is taking the input audio signal and trying to figure out what sample matches the timbre the best. And a part of the timbre is pitch, but timbre is also everything else. It's how bright the sound is, how loud it is. So we have a couple parameters that have to do with the synthesis and also have to do with how it interprets the signal coming in. Let me walk you through some of those. Here we have particles. This is basically the accuracy, and the more particles, the more heavy this is going to be on the CPU. What particles mean is that in every moment, it is randomly selecting a whole bunch of parts of all the samples, and it's doing a vote, and it's picking on which one is the closest to whatever's coming in. And then when it's picked a good candidate, there's a chance that it will skip to another sample or stay on that sample. And that's what stickiness is. What is the likelihood that the very next bit of audio that comes in is actually going to represent a different sample versus the one you're already listening to? And that's stickiness right there. Polyphony, of course, is how many samples you hear at the same time. And then we have bias right here. And you see that there is a separation of spec and amp down here at the bottom. Now that means spectrum and amplitude. So basically the bias knob has to do with, are we analyzing the spectrum and prioritizing that? Or are we analyzing the amplitude of the sound coming in and prioritizing that when we're picking a matching sound? So generally for percussive sounds and dynamic sounds, amplitude is something that you want to lean a little bit more heavily on. And then with sounds that where you're trying to match the pitch, you want to go into the spectrum because you're trying to match that timbre even more than the amplitude. So that's what all these knobs do. And then we have the input gain right there. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then right here is a high pass and the low pass that you don't actually hear. This will process the input signal before it gets to the DSP. So that's really useful, especially if you want to use this as a layer. Let's hear how it sounds actually just with this melody. You see, I bring this high pass up, and now it's not getting those notes anymore, but listen, it's getting these birds up top, because those birds are included in the corpus, and then we come down and we'll find the notes, we'll find the fundamental harmonics. Let's go to something that's just vocals now so we can hear the difference. We'll go over to Van Grandvox, one of the vocalists that contributed to our built-in sample library. It's like a glitchy sampler. Let's even put a little bit of reverb on this. You'll see how it sounds. Let's go over to something naturey like Nature Foley. I love this preset. Let's turn up the decay now. Basically, there is a reverb, a hidden reverb inside of Concatenator that you don't hear directly. The reverb is applied to the input signal before the concatenative synthesis happens. So as a result, what you hear is a longer decay with really quick notes. Really helpful and really useful if you want to use especially these Foley sounds where you want to make it sound like it's kind of crumbling away or rattling around. All right, let's talk about making your own preset. So this is, I feel, the most exciting part of the Concatenator is using it with your own sample libraries. So I'm going to come over here to this demo that I made earlier. Little chord progression in D minor. Now, if you know what key you're writing in, you can go grab samples in that key from Splice. In Splice, you can say, hey, I only want samples in D minor. And that's exactly what I did. And I went and I found this really interesting plucking instrument. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually clear this corpus first. I'm going to get rid of the samples that are there, but it's by right-clicking anywhere and say clear entire corpus. Now we're empty. And I'm going to search for samples that have the word D minor in it that I've downloaded from Splice. So let's grab these samples right here, and let's also grab anything that has A minor because that's a relative key. I find that Splice is really compatible with Concatenator because you can search by key and search by tempo. And I know that any riff, any melody that are playing notes in the scale are going to have plenty of notes that I need to recreate this kind of melody. So let's hear what that sounds like. You saw how fast that loaded. Sounds great. Let's go ahead and brighten it up. And it's important to remember that any change that you make to the synthesis will impact what samples are chosen and how fast it's being played. So let's bring that rate back up to 16th notes. You're going to hear the difference. While you're playing with Concatenator, you can just repeat this process and just go find other samples. And, you don't need to search for key. You could just get curious and say, hey, I wonder what the vocals in this Middle East Essentials sample library sound like. And you can just throw the entire folder in there. Bam. And it loads very quickly. And here we go. When you're ready to save your corpus, just hit save up there, put a description in there, and you can define what the input is most ideal on this. And you're good to go. I think the other really practical use case of Concatenator is to use it with TV, game, and film sound scoring. Here's a scene from a Disney movie, and what I've done is I've just made vocal utterances into the mic that vaguely match the action in the scene. I'll give you a real quick preview of that. Yeah, so I've taken that and then I've pulled up the Nature Foley preset, And then I've added to it a little bit. And I think this is something a sound designer would do if they're doing a scene like this anyway. You would go to your sample libraries and say, what are the kind of timbres and sounds that match this scene? So I've loaded up this nature rainforest into it, and let me load this one too. I think this might sound good. And now we're going to turn the mix all the way up and see how it sounds. Yeah, that's pretty spot on. And this is without even adding automation or anything. So let's actually try to use this brand new low pass filter, and maybe we'll start high and we'll go really low and then we'll come back up again right there. Now remember, this is filtering the sound coming into it. So you actually don't hear the sound filtered. What you hear is the influence of the filter on the input signals. Yeah, there we go, like that. Yeah, I think just a little bit of filter action right there in the high pass. And then we'll also just add a bunch of decay right here before it gets right there, because we really want it to be really big. And there you have it. I mean, that's a very complex scene done very, very quickly. Take you about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I could do a lot of different variations of this just by changing the stickiness, by changing the bias. And it's all very conveniently fitting on one screen along with my video because it is mini. So I hope that you enjoy the future of sound design and audio layering using Concatenator and Concatenator Mini, only by DataMind Audio.